Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. We hear from the president of a law firm representing the Alberta pastor who was thrown in jail for holding worship services. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole blasts Prime Minister Justin Trudeau over Canada's lack of COVID-19 vaccine distribution. And part 3 of our series on the controversial Grassy Mountain Coal Project. Today we look at the environmental impact of open-pit coal mining.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. We begin this evening talking about the woman at the center of a sexual misconduct allegation against the former head of a sexual violence advocacy group. The woman, only known as Emma, spoke with Bridge City News in an exclusive interview. Jeanette Rocher has the details.
She's waited nearly 2.5 years to speak up about an inappropriate relationship she had with a man she had gone to for help. But once she finally did, the woman, who can only be known as Emma, says she wasn't treated fairly by the authorities she reported it to.
At minimum, it would be nice if when people came forward, they weren't treated with these biases and these stigmas and these judgments, rather receive my information and ensure to me you'll honor it.
Emma had been the victim of domestic violence in the past and was seeking help through the Domestic Violence Action Team. It was there, in the summer of 2018, she met Bill Kay, their program director, and a former Lethbridge police inspector.
I feel I was absolutely manipulated. We're talking about someone who policed longer than I've been alive, and then continued to work in the community in a very close and expert capacity.
She says she felt coerced into a sexual relationship with him that lasted from May through August of 2018, but was too afraid to say anything at the time.
I was very vulnerable. I work with the vulnerable. I know it and I see it from the other side now, and it absolutely tears me apart because my silence fed into that. I get emotional, right? I'm sorry. To think when I'm across from somebody else, how could somebody look at that and see anything other than someone who is so broken, because that is what I was.
When Emma finally came forward to report it to authorities some 2 years later, she said there was a bias because she was dealing with a former inspector who was still called upon as an expert in the field of sexual violence.
I'm not the type to not take accountability. I do take accountability for my choices, but I strongly believe that our society has this problem with victim blaming, and it's allowed the police to see it a little different. It's about justice. It's about protecting the vulnerable.
According to a statement from LPS, they took the position the RCMP should carry the investigation to avoid any appearance of a conflict of interest. But they also claimed that when the Coaldale RCMP indicated they'd be forwarding the file back to LPS, they asked to confirm that the complainant approved, and they were told that she had. According to Emma, this statement is untrue. She says she was never made aware that her file would end up back in the hands of LPS. Emma says it wasn't until the Solicitor General got involved that the file got rerouted back to RCMP. According to Coaldale RCMP, they have confirmed that they're assuming the investigation as requested by LPS, that no charges have been laid, and that their goal is to complete a thorough and complete investigation. Bill Kay has not been charged, and the allegations have not been proven in court. The investigation continues. For Bridge City News, I'm Jeanette Rocher.
Pastor Artur Pawlowski, who leads a street ministry in Calgary, is a die-hard disciple. He spoke with BCN's Loris Alexander about preaching the gospel and feeding the poor at any cost, even his life.
I've never closed the church. I'll never close the church. If they arrest me, I'll do a church in prison. I was arrested many times, and I turned the cell into a preaching pulpit. And I have captive audience every single time. They cannot escape. They're stuck there with me.
Pawlowski has indeed turned adversity into opportunity. No stranger to media attention, Pawlowski believes that our fight with COVID-19 is not a wrestle with flesh and blood.
As a church, we failed Jesus Christ. We have to go to our knees and we have to say to him, God, forgive us for not doing what you called us to do. Forgive us for being terrified. Forgive us for not having faith in you. Forgive us that the virus was bigger in our minds, in our hearts, than your word that says nothing will touch you.
Pawlowski is challenging pastors to speak out about their faith being threatened.
They're terrified. They don't want to lose their charitable status. They don't want to lose their support. They don't want to be blacklisted by the media and slandered like me. They don't want to be called white supremacists. They don't want to be called racist. They don't want to be called homophobes. They don't want to be called xenophobes. I mean, ridiculous. So they prefer to be in the shadows.
With no plans on stopping, this street preacher says fulfilling the plans God has for his life takes precedence over, well, pretty much everything.
I'm going to do what I have been doing for the past 22 years. I'll feed the poor, no matter what they will bring. I'll congregate here. I will still pray for the sick. I'll still anoint them with oil. And I will still deliver the message that God is giving me, the message that He's putting in my heart.
For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
The people that Jesus died and rose from the grave.
Pastor James Coates of Grace Life Church, just outside of Edmonton, is currently in jail for continually breaking the province's health restrictions and hosting full worship services during the pandemic. He says governments exist to serve God's plan, so when worship is restricted, they're violating that plan and must be challenged. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson says Pastor Coates is not alone in his thinking.
He had a bail hearing this week where he basically said that he was not going to follow the rules, and so he's held over until his next bail hearing. So he's still behind bars at this time. So yeah, there have been a few other cases of this across the country. We saw it in Montreal a little bit at the start of the pandemic. There have obviously been plenty of concerns among religious Canadians about their ability to go and worship, but this is certainly the let's say the most high stakes example, I would say, that we've seen so far, certainly in Alberta.
Now, the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms in Calgary is representing Pastor James Coates. Joining me now is the president of the JCCF, John Carpe. John, how is Pastor Coates holding up?
He's not allowed to receive any visitors from friends or family. He is effectively in solitary confinement because not only is he in jail, but there is a 14-day quarantine provision. So he's holding out okay, but of course, it's tough to be cut off from your spouse and your children, and it's also difficult when you don't know how long you're going to be there. The trial could be several months away, and Justice Centre is filing an appeal, but that could be days or weeks before that's heard by the Alberta Court of Queen's Bench.
John, many people are wondering, why not just host online or virtual services like many other churches are doing? Why break the law?
Pastor Coates has the conviction that Christians are supposed to meet together in person, and his conscience is telling him that the way to honor God is to obey God and to meet in person and to sing. And underlying all of that is that these charter violating restrictions on our freedom to assemble, to associate, to worship, all of these restrictions, the medical and scientific basis is just not there.
That was John Carpe, president of the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, joining me from Calgary. Over the past 24 hours, the Alberta government says there were 415 new cases of COVID-19 identified. There are currently 362 people in hospital with the virus, including 55 in intensive care. There are 4,887 active cases in the province. Sadly, 7 new deaths were also reported. Fortunately, more than 123,000 Albertans have also recovered from the virus. Health Minister Tyler Shandro received word that more and more Albertans are defying public health orders and are getting together in large groups. He addressed that earlier today with the media.
We all need to be following the public health restrictions for us to be able to protect not just ourselves, but those who are the most vulnerable around us, and that each one of us who ends up contracting COVID, there's a chance of us then transmitting further in the community, which could eventually lead to more cases and outbreaks in certain really vulnerable settings.
Alberta's opposition leader, Rachel Notley, was the guest speaker at this week's Southern Alberta Council of Public Affairs meeting. She discussed various strategies for Albertans when it comes to the daunting task of economic recovery in our province. Notley shared strategies for diversifying our economy and coming out of the pandemic with strength.
We need jobs that pay the mortgage, jobs that sustain families, and jobs that improve the quality of life in our communities. Most importantly, jobs that last. Second, the strategy that we develop has to benefit and include all Albertans. We cannot have an economic recovery that leaves more and more people left behind. And that means we have to include racialized people, women, people with disabilities, and quite frankly, all the working people who did the heavy lifting during the last boom. All of those people have to be part of the recovery.
There's some good news for small businesses in Alberta. The Alberta government is providing a new grant called the Enhanced COVID-19 Business Benefit to the tune of $30,000. This money can be used by small and medium-sized businesses for ongoing costs that have been accumulating during the pandemic. Businesses can hire staff, pay bills, or buy personal protective equipment with the added money. The payments will be made available in April. The Nikiyuko Japanese Garden brought in nearly 20,000 guests to the Winter Lights Festival this year. That is close to an 18% increase from the previous year. As Micah Quinn explains now, this year's event was different due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but it had the same welcoming feel from previous years.
More lights are being taken down today at the Nikiyuko Japanese Garden following the huge success of the Winter Lights Festival.
It was really heartwarming to see how many people came out this year. I think it was a particularly difficult year for a lot of people, so to have something that was outdoors that people could enjoy with their friends and family, I think a lot of people were really needing that and looking for something like that, so I think that really contributed to the higher number.
Just under 170,000 lights were set up for this year's festivities.
And so I think, again, in this year, it was even more important that we were doing all that we could to give people something to do to help them keep those traditions alive, and for new visitors as well. We saw about 56% of our visitors, this was actually their first year coming, so that's huge for us, and we're very excited that we were able to attract so many new people and give them something to do and give them a little bit of light in the dark winter months.
In previous years, the festival would see more than 600 people per hour in the garden, but this year it was limited to 100 per half hour due to COVID-19 restrictions.
So it actually created a really private, quiet experience for our guests, so I think it was a little bit different, but a lot of people really enjoyed it. It felt more like they had the garden to themselves. They were able to enjoy the lights and the ice sculptures without worrying about big crowds.
Burdusco says that the garden hopes to reopen to the public later this year in mid-May. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
The Fresh Start South Country Treatment Centre helps those who deal with addictions in our city. The organization is now being run by the Fresh Start Recovery Centre in Calgary. The group's executive director, Stacey Peterson, presented to the Lethbridge Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee today. Peterson says the treatment centre has a recovery rate that is 5 times higher than the national rate for their patients. The centre in Lethbridge is looking for further expansion for more beds and housing.
But that tells me we have 191 people that want help, and I can't get them in right now because I don't have room. Right, so I have 50 beds here in Calgary, I have 23 in Lethbridge. We have our 46 post-treatment, but I am so heartened by the openness in Lethbridge to start to look at that expansion. If I were to have a crystal ball, I'd say that we would probably expand by another 50 beds down there within the next year or so. And immediately we're looking at post-treatment housing in the community.
The treatment centre focuses on a 14 to 16-week program where they provide patients with individual counselling, group treatment, healthy meals, and fitness. The City of Lethbridge announced that beginning February 22nd, private swimming lessons can be held at a couple of city pools. The lessons will take place Monday through Thursday and Saturday mornings at both Nicholas Sharon and Stanciwick pools. Officials say both pools will also be accepting school groups during the week and have space available for private household bookings. The pool operator, Recreation Excellence, says COVID-19 protocols and guidance as set by the province will be followed. To register, you have to call either Nicholas Sharon or Stanciwick pools. The Lethbridge Hurricanes have named their leadership group. Dino Calmbites was awarded captain, and after nearly a year away from the rink, the Canes will drop the puck at home on February the 26th. Now, it's been a roller coaster ride so far, with players recently out of quarantine and practicing at the NMAC Centre. As Ainsley O'Reilly explains, the newly named leadership group could be one of the franchise's best ever.
The Lethbridge Hurricanes announced their leader group Thursday. Dino Calmbites named the 29th captain in franchise history.
He's our guy. You know, he's come in, he's worked hard. Not only is he a good player on the ice and leads us by his work ethic, he's equally as good off the ice with how he treats our guys, how he treats the young guys.
Calmbites tallied 29 points last season, 16 goals and 13 assists. Head coach Brent Kissio said numerous times that the decision to give him a C was a no-brainer. Combite says he is thankful and noted that he's within good company.
You know, with our group we had last year, it was awesome having, Cousin and Preef lead us there. And then, in years past with Bellerive and Wong and some of the bigger names. So it's cool to be, in that class with those guys. And for Brent to say that we're one of the better groups, it's obviously a huge honor, but, we got to make sure that we follow through with that.
The players recently finished a mandatory quarantine and will be buddied up with a roommate, just a short walk from the NMAC Centre. The first week back on the ice came with expected challenges, but coaches and players say they're ready for next Friday's matchup at home against the Edmonton Oil Kings.
I think it's been really unique. A lot of guys have come in, not skating too much just with everything that's been going on, but I think our pace has been really good. The energy's, really high. Guys are chomping at the bit to get out there. Next week will be fun, and we're going to be prepared for it, and we're looking forward to it.
For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
Over the past couple of days, we brought you an in-depth look at the narrative surrounding the proposed Grassy Mountain Coal Project. The potential open-pit coal mine in the Crow's Nest Pass has gathered support from some and scrutiny from others. In video journalist Ainsley O'Reilly's final part on the three-part series, she explores the project's environmental impacts.
Ask anyone what their main concern is with the Grassy Mountain Coal Project, and you'll likely get the same answer.
Selenium.
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 Selenium is an essential nutrient. It's a powerful antioxidant that humans and aquatic organisms need. The problem is contamination is a known byproduct of coal mining. Selenium is safe at the levels the mining company is proposing. However, scientists say the risks build up over time.
When the selenium is at about 2 to 4 parts per billion in the water, that's a high enough concentration that it can accumulate sufficiently in algae to pose a risk to any of the organisms that might be consuming that algae higher up in the food chain.
The Grassy Mountain Coal Project will operate within the Old Man watershed, a basin that supplies water to thousands of southern Albertans.
Will they be able to remove it? And how much will they be able to remove? Because we're talking large amounts of water, and so it's a very large scale.
Water from the project will also run east through Saskatchewan's river system. A comparison that's been used over and over again is what's already being done to treat selenium contamination west of Grassy Mountain to existing mines in the Elk Valley. Reports of disappearance into rare cutthroat trout, deformed fish, and alarming levels of selenium have been made, extending into Montana's Koocanusa Reservoir as far as Idaho.
Have never seen data from Teck Coal that shows that their treatment facility is effectively reducing selenium in the water or in macroinvertebrates, algae, or fish downstream of the Line Creek wastewater treatment plant.
In 2020, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency demanded the BC government hand over Teck Resources data after finding toxic reports of the heavy metal. Riversdale Resources, the company behind Grassy Mountain, provided 20,000 pages of detailed information, highlighting the project is specifically designed to manage selenium. Officials stress the benefits of a new age mine that boasts modern technology, no tailings ponds, and the ability to reuse and recycle the existing surface water or groundwater.
Applying the technology that has been developed over the last 2 or 3 decades, and we're designing it in from the first day of this project. So that's putting us on a completely different level from some of the other mines.
They're basically saying, well, we'll just contain all of the water and then we'll treat it. Well, how hard is it to contain that volume of water in such a difficult and mountainous terrain with the huge variability of water flows that we experience in this area?
Robin Campbell, president of the Coal Association of Canada, says that water is important, and the miners within the community know that.
The miners that are working at that mine live in the area, so we understand the importance of water because we're going to drink it. Our kids are going to use it.
The proposed mine is located near Treaty 7 Indigenous lands, and Riversdale Resources has received letters of support from every single chief and council.
That's unprecedented.
Many Indigenous community members look forward to employment opportunities, but a booming online presence has been made by those opposing the project, upset that there was no consultation with its members.
Is not just a recognition of Aboriginal title, but actually the protecting of Aboriginal title on Indigenous land. Indigenous land should equal Indigenous choice, and in many of these industry projects, Indigenous people have not consented.
Provincial and federal regulators are currently reviewing the project. Canada's Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Jonathan Wilkinson, declined Bridge City News' interview request. If approved, construction for Grassy Mountain will begin this coming fall. For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
The meltdown has begun across much of southwestern Alberta as the warmer temperatures have arrived. In fact, it may feel even more like spring later this weekend and into next week. Full weather details are on deck. It was another beautiful day in Lethbridge, nice and mild, and the warmer temperatures should continue, so make sure you stock up on the windshield washer fluid. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a complete look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, we think it's warm now. Just wait a few days. We could hit double-digit temperatures.
I know it's hard to believe, yeah, double digits by Monday at least, and certainly plus temperatures until then. Into this evening, -7 is our overnight low. Not too bad, but with the wind chill could feel a lot colder. 50 to 70 kilometer wind gusts is what we're looking at. Same thing for tomorrow with that 50 to 70 kilometer per hour wind gusts. Now, of course, as we get into these plus temperatures, we are probably going to be getting those Chinook winds. So we are going to be expecting some windy days ahead of us. 3 degrees the high for Saturday, lots of sunshine. Sunday, windy, 7 degrees the high. Monday, all the way up to 11. There's our double digits that we were talking about. Lots of sunshine and also windy on Monday. Tuesday, 60% chance of flurries with a high of 3 degrees and a high of 1 on Wednesday with a mix of sun and clouds. So seeing all those plus temperatures does make it feel like spring. It's putting us back more into these average high temperatures and even higher. So average high for this time of year, 2. -10 is the average low. 14 degrees was our high temperature on this day back in 1943. And in 1986, our chilliest day on record was -33. Sun rose this morning at 7:35 a.m. and our sunset will be right just before 6 p.m. at 5:55 p.m. So longer days, about 10.5 hours. Doesn't feel like that long ago that we had less than 8. Lots of rain expected on the west coast this week. Tomorrow, showers in Victoria and Vancouver, high of 6 degrees in those cities. 1 degree the expected high for tomorrow with a mix of sun and cloud. Calgary experiencing a bit of wind as well. Tomorrow, 0 degrees is their high with a mix of sun and cloud. So looking to the rest of the prairies here, we're still getting those chilly conditions, but with wind chill, particularly feeling colder. Saskatoon coming down in temperature, -7 from the minus teens that it was earlier this week. Same thing for Regina, -7 the high, lots of sunshine. -14 the high in Winnipeg with sunny skies. Now, as we look to central Canada, periods of snow expected tomorrow in Toronto, -1 the high. About 2 centimeters of snow expected both in Ottawa and Montreal with highs of -6, so a little bit more snow there. As we look further east into Atlantic Canada, starting with Fredericton, a mix of sun and cloud there, high of -6, -4 the expected high for Halifax, also experiencing some snow accumulating particularly for this coming weekend. 10 to 20 centimeters is expected. -8 the high for Charlottetown and -3 the expected high for St. John's, Newfoundland with about a 20 kilometer per hour wind. So there you go. That is your forecast.
Today's weather is brought to you by Four Seasons Home Comforts, experts in heating, AC, and fireplace install and repair.
Westjet is temporarily suspending operations in various Canadian cities, including Medicine Hat and Lloydminster. The airline says service will be suspended from March 19th until June 24th. In a release, company president Ed Sims said due to the increasingly restrictive policies, they're once again left with no other option than to suspend service to those communities. Westjet also says flights between St. John's and Halifax will be suspended as of March 21st, and service between London and Toronto will cease on March 22nd. Westjet continues to operate at more than 90% reduction year over year. A new report by the Business Council of Alberta says a harmonized sales tax along with a carbon tax could help Alberta with the revenue it needs right now. The group says it is concerned about our province's finances and says Premier Jason Kenney has to make tough decisions to bring Alberta back to a more sustainable position. The council estimates a new tax would bring in around $1 billion for each percentage point of a sales tax. Another $1.5 billion could be raised from a $50 per ton carbon tax. Premier Kenney threw cold water on the notion during a recent news conference, and he said this would be the worst possible time to ask people to pay more. North America's first Bitcoin exchange fund began trading on the TSX today. The ETF developed by Toronto-based Purpose Investments was approved for trading last week by the Ontario Securities Commission. It's the first of 2 Bitcoin ETFs expected to launch on the TSX this week. The funds will allow retail investors to gain access to Bitcoin investments without actually owning the asset directly. Now is a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 100 points in the day to finish at 18,274. The Dow was down 119 to 31,493. The S&P 500 was down 17 points to 3914, and the Nasdaq was down 100 points on the day to finish at 13,865. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 91 cents to $60.23 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 15 cents to $3.07 US. Gold was down 3 cents to $17.7564 US an ounce, and silver was up a cent to $27.04 US an ounce. Wheat is at $307 per metric ton, barley's at $313, canola's at $731, and corn is at $341 per metric ton. Live cattle were down 18 cents to $115.13, feeder cattle were down 23 cents to $138.20, and lean hogs were up 3 cents on the day to $84.93. The Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 78.87 US. We have breaking news for you this hour. The City of Lethbridge has received notice that the applicant, who is hoping to establish a new resource centre for HIV Community Link in our city, has had a change of heart and withdrawn their application. The 3,100 square foot development was to be set up on 13th Street North. There has been talk of more addiction support in our city since the province pulled funding for the Lethbridge supervised consumption site, thus shutting it down. The fight for freedoms continues in many areas of our country, including right here in Alberta. Coming up, an update from our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson on the plight of the Edmonton area pastor who turned himself in and is in jail for hosting full worship services. There are many legal gun owners who are taking issue with Ottawa's proposed new gun ban legislation, which would allow municipalities to ban the handguns. There are also some local politicians who are not too happy with it, including Alberta Justice Minister Casey Madu. To talk about this in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Tyler, you've been following this story closely, and the main reason Minister Madu takes issue with the legislation is that it doesn't really go after the real criminals who have illegal handguns?
Yeah, he said basically that the Liberals are, I believe his words were obsessively focused on law-abiding gun owners, and instead of going after the criminals who use them to commit crimes. So he said that in a statement on Tuesday night. And the other thing that you'd mentioned was this municipal handgun ban possibility. It's sort of, they've gone through the assault weapons ban, so-called. There's a gun buyback coming, and the federal government has also apparently given municipalities the power to put in bylaws about transportation and things like that would essentially make it impossible to own a handgun in a city. Now, the issue with this that the Justice Minister points out is that municipalities are the province's jurisdiction. So they're sort of saying that, well, this is our jurisdiction, not yours, so you can't do this. And that is perhaps a little bit debatable in terms of the clash between province and federal governments. But the other thing that's happened and has been going on for a while, sort of in the background here, is a private member's bill from the Brooks Medicine Hat MLA that would basically limit the power that Alberta municipalities have to even put these laws into place. And Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi was asked about it. He said, look, maybe we'll do this, maybe we won't. But the issue that he saw in it was there should sort of be one law across the entire country. So the whole thing is sort of an odd scenario. And, you know, even people, I think, who are instinctually inclined to support this sort of thing are maybe scratching their heads a little bit about how it might work.
So Brooks Medicinet MLA, as you mentioned, Michaela Glasgow has introduced that bill that would limit the ability of municipalities in Alberta to restrict the activities. So, but how would that actually work, Tyler, with the proposed new federal legislation?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't know if anyone actually really knows the answer just yet. There's been some hints that the UCP is going to expedite this private member's bill to try and get it passed into law. And then I suppose at that point, it becomes a question for the courts, most likely, if, say, Edmonton decides to put this in place and then someone challenges it. It's frankly a little bit of a mess. But of course, the other thing, because there's always so many things happening on these sort of interjurisdictional issues, is there may be a federal election coming. And this law, these new gun restrictions might not even get passed into law before something like that happens. So at the end of the day, this could be, a bunch of noise about what amounts to being nothing.
The RCMP union has launched a campaign to save the Mounties in Alberta. Now, and as you and I have discussed before, the Kenney government says it wants to see a provincial police force similar to what they have in Ontario. Does it all come down to dollars and cents?
At the end of the day, you have to think it probably will. As it operates right now, the Mounties operating in Alberta, there's a cost-sharing agreement between the federal government and the provincial government to pay for policing. So the question, if Alberta was to go ahead with a provincial police force, would be how much does Alberta then just have to pay? Will there be any grant money or something like that coming from the federal government? But at the end of the day, yeah, I think it probably is going to be a matter of cost. Now, this is obviously linked in with some other issues that you and I have talked about before. This idea came up with the Fair Deal panel when it was doing its work. There have been issues with rural crime. Rural residents and those in smaller towns have been concerned about RCMP response times, things like that. The UCP has sort of argued that perhaps a local police force would be better able to address these things. So the National Police Federation, representing RCMP members, is sort of going through this campaign, pointing out the good stuff that RCMP members do in the province, and trying to make the case that this is a more efficient, more affordable way to do policing. So, also to some extent, I think, fighting for the jobs of their members.
Even though Alberta has seen variants of the COVID-19 virus, Dr. Dean Henshaw says that will not hinder the province's reopening plans. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. She's said basically that they haven't set a threshold for these cases to at what point they're going to say, whoa, we need to slow down. So we have around 200, 250 perhaps now cases of the variants in the province, but they've really been only growing by about a dozen cases per day on average. So at this point, medical officials and the government, watching this very, very closely. But these are still by no means the dominant strain in Alberta. They are not spreading, wildly or overtaking the other variant, the main variant. So she's basically saying a wait and see approach, I think would be fair to say. But certainly they haven't rushed forward on reopening things that are currently closed.
Tensions continue to rise between government health officials and various church leaders across the country. Now, here in Alberta, the pastor of Grace Life Church just outside of Edmonton continues to host Sunday services in excess of the gathering size rules of 15%. Pastor James Coates turned himself into police on Tuesday, and he's being represented by James Kitchen with the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms.
Yes. So this has sort of been a little bit of an ongoing drama. And last weekend, the RCMP went to the church and he was basically charged for violating public health orders. And he's sort of consistently maintained, his lawyers have consistently maintained that he's exercising his charter rights to freedom of religion, freedom to worship, things like that. And as it stands now, he's actually still in custody. He was sort of arrested for refusing to abide by the public health orders and ignoring a judge who had said that they ought to be enforced. And he had a bail hearing this week where he basically said that he was not going to follow the rules, and so he's held over until his next bail hearing. So he's still behind bars at this time. So yeah, there've been a few other cases of this across the country. We saw it in Montreal a little bit at the start of the pandemic. There have obviously been plenty of concerns among religious Canadians about their ability to go and worship, but this is certainly the let's say, the most high stakes example, I would say, that we've seen so far, certainly in Alberta.
Yeah, also the church in Steinbach, Manitoba as well. I just never thought I'd
Yes.
see the day a pastor being arrested for preaching the word of God. Like we live in unprecedented times right now, Tyler. Now, the NDP is questioning the UCP rollout of $1,200 checks to essential workers as part of a cost-sharing program between Alberta and Ottawa. Now, Alberta's spending $118 million and the feds $347 million, and the money will be going towards different sectors, including nurses, childcare workers, but the opposition is wondering about maybe some retail workers?
Yeah, so the idea is that this is a little bit of money, a little bit of support for people who have, sort of been at the front lines of the pandemic, whether that's, someone's been working at the gas station, someone's been working in the hospital kind of thing. And the NDP has basically been concerned that the details of who this money is going to go to hasn't been clear enough. Obviously was going to go to people like nurses, but what about the people who've been working in grocery stores and things like that? So the UCP says details are coming on this, but these are significant programs that I think probably take quite a bit of work to sort out. But the NDP is raising concerns about this. And the other thing that is sort of happening in the money front is the Alberta government announced on Wednesday some new funding for small and medium-sized businesses, basically, I think up to $10,000 to sort of help them weather this next leg of the pandemic. So, we've seen lots of money coming from the feds through the CERB program and wage benefit programs and things like that. And these are, just two examples of what the Alberta government is sort of contributing to help people out who are on the front lines of the pandemic, let's say.
Tyler, a survey from student groups suggests there has been a brain drain in the province, with young people not seeing many prospects for their future. Now, Tyler, some of these well-educated and talented young people are thinking of leaving for greener pastures?
Yeah, a study by the University of Calgary Student Union just sort of surveying people and saying, what are your post-graduation plans? And the people they talk to, some of them certainly, are looking at Alberta and saying, there's been a long economic recession that we're in right now that there isn't, an obvious or immediate way out of. There's budgetary issues. There's the issues of what some tax reform might look like. There's jobs issues. There's healthcare issues. They're concerned about tuition levels right now, as those seem likely to be going up. So, in conclusion, they're basically looking at the circumstances of the Alberta Advantage and saying they don't really see the advantage anymore. So perhaps they'll decamp to BC, perhaps to the United States. This isn't an obviously huge political problem at this point, but I would say that the UCP and Jason Kenney in particular have talked a lot about Alberta's benefit to business and entrepreneurs and investors because of a young, well-educated workforce. I think we might have the youngest workforce in the country. So, at some point, if this brain drain materializes, I think that does become a political issue. Of course, a survey is one thing. Whether or not we start seeing people leave in large droves is another. But it's just one of those, trends, I think, on sort of the sidelines here that's worth keeping an eye on.
I've spoken to some college graduates as well here in southern Alberta, graduating from university and college, and they're thinking of going to Vancouver, Toronto. Let me tell you, it's an eye-opener, especially if you want to try and save up to buy your first home. A fixer-upper for $1.6 million. Then they're like, well, maybe Alberta is looking pretty good right about now, A longer-term care association has been lobbying the province to shield it from lawsuits related to deaths during the COVID-19 pandemic. Tyler, there appear to be a wide variety of class action lawsuits against home operators across the country.
There's been a lot of drama in long-term care homes since the start of the pandemic. There's no doubt about that, the bulk of the tragedy has happened in long-term care homes. And as you say, class action lawsuits brought by families of people who died in these homes. So basically what operators are saying is they sort of want to be shielded from liability in a way that I believe other medical professionals are. They're saying that, look, if you can sue us for someone in long-term care passing away, then our business model essentially is broken. It would destroy the ability of these homes to operate. Now the lawyers involved in the class action lawsuit saying that, well, no, this is a way for you to try and sidestep accountability, to avoid accountability. And the government so far has not given any indication that they are going to go ahead with something like that. They're aware of the requests. They're aware of the lobbying. but they aren't obviously moving ahead with it just yet. But I think that's important because so many people have had a loved one in long-term care. So many people have had a loved one who's been lost in long-term care. It's an accountability mechanism to some extent, but it'll be quite interesting to see if any jurisdictions in the country go ahead with something like this, in the wake of so much tragedy in these places.
Now, Tyler, before I let you go, I want to talk to you a bit about the Edmonton Football Club. It sounds like they put a patent on or a trademark on the Edmonton Elk as a potential name. As a former Eskimo, the Edmonton Elk. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's not bad. It's better than the Edmonton Empire or whatever the other option was.
Or the Evergreens,
I mean, I know
right?
there were a number, but yeah.
Yeah.
I can live with elk. I think so. We couldn't have had a third Rough Riders team, though. That would never have worked. So
that's right. Our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks for your time.
Always a pleasure, Hal.
The storms of life can at times take a real toll on our mental and emotional health. Today we're chatting with a woman who has an amazing story of healing and how God helped her after she was viciously gang raped about 10 years ago. Her name is Colette Aikema, Associate Speaker with Faith Beyond Belief, an organization whose mission it is to help Christians become effective in sharing Christ in everyday conversations. Colette, welcome to BCN.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just honored to be here, so thank you.
Oh, it's our pleasure having you on board. Colette, describe first of all for our viewers who you were before you were being raped.
I was just a regular, maybe, I think we have to go really far back. I think that the issue of sexuality was put on my heart when I was younger. I was abused when I was a child. And I also think so as much as that was also for evil, I also think that just ignited in me a awareness of sexuality and the fact that there's this, there's something that we as Christians often don't talk about. And I grew up in a believing family, an amazing, loving home. I was raised Christian, and I know what I believe, and I know the God who loves me. And that was, but it was always kind of a bit of there was an undercurrent of this in my life. I was dealing with compulsive masturbation, and then of course I was raped when I was in high school, in junior high. So it was really, it changed everything. And yet at the same time, this was something that was already, there was something there. There was a part of me that wanted to have this conversation. There was a part of me that had been ignited in this. And, all of, just like everything, I only learned from all these things. And now I'm able to just talk about what happened and realize that, God's grace is more.
Let's describe what actually led to that fateful day when you were raped.
It was just a regular day. I was just a young girl. And it's hard to talk about the specifics of that day, Hal. But it was a place where I should have been safe, and I was with people where I should have been safe. And I was not being kept safe that day. And it was just terrible realizing that I could be in a safe community and be, I think I grew up knowing that, knowing the scriptures, knowing that we all have gone astray. We all like sheep have gone astray, and there's no one who does good, not even one. And yet you believe that people just won't do certain things, right? And then I had to learn that even Christians themselves will do depraved things. And that was very, very difficult because it completely shattered my spirituality and my faith in my community. And yet, God was able to keep me safe at that time afterward. So.
Those people who attacked you, were they ever captured and charged?
No, they were not.
Wow. Is it still an open investigation, or is it a cold case with the police?
It's a cold case with the police because it ended up being a historic investigation because I was unable to come forward with my testimony and with my experience until just a few years ago. And by then, too much time had already passed. And when the perpetrators were, in being investigated, they denied, they refused to have lie detector tests, and then refused basically all communication. And then the investigation went dead from there.
Let me ask you something, Colette. It's been about 10 years now. Have you been able to forgive those who did this horrifying thing to you?
Yes, I have. I have been able to forgive them. And my body and my mind do not forget. And even my heart does not forget. But my life is full of brokenness as well. And like I said, we are all equal under God. We've all sinned equally. And so, yes, I have forgiven them.
Colette, how did this really affect your relationships with men and women?
I think it just kind of blew up what was already an issue for me. So I was already, just like any regular girl, I was going through the end of puberty, and so just like any other any other girl, I was jittery around boys. I became aroused at awkward times. I wondered if I was gay because there were girls that I really loved. I wondered if I was bi. I wondered if maybe I was actually a boy. And so all these things were on my mind. But the rape, and then especially what's really important for people to understand is that because of what happened, the trauma, I also became addicted to pornography. And it wasn't just, people tend to say, well, girls, it's different for girls. Girls are not addicted to hardcore pornography. Well, yeah, they are. When we Google something, we find the exact same thing as men. We find the exact same thing as children and as seniors, right? So we need to realize that the internet's not discretionary that way. And as much as people say that women are not visually wired, we also are visually stimulated, some women more than others, and we're not all the same. And so for me, pornography became a real problem. I really struggled with pornography addiction and sexual addiction because of what happened, which led to all kinds of problems, right? I mean, because of the porn addiction, what happened was it's something we call a hypersexualized outlook on life. So what that means is that I just saw sexuality everywhere. I would just be walking down the road and I would see people crossing the street toward me, and immediately when my mind would go, I bet they're going to go have sex. Completely out of context. And I wasn't raised that way. It's important to understand that that's not how I was. I didn't think anybody else experienced life that way. So I felt very, very outside. I felt very alone.
So let's talk about how God really helped, first of all, with your healing after being attacked and raped, and secondly, through this porn addiction.
Right. Well, what's really amazing is that I think the one thing that we have to remember is that human sexuality is inconsistent, and human sexuality is subject to change and subject to trauma and subject to brain chemistry and genetics and all these things. But Christian sexuality and moral sexuality is not dependent on those things. And so for me, what became huge was realizing that I was able to see the trauma, I was able to see my addiction, I was able to see the fallout, all the consequences. I was able to see that through the lens of a Christian worldview. And because of that, I was able to God reminded me that there are constants, that there are realities, that no matter what happens to my body, no matter what happens in my life, no matter what emotions I have or thoughts I have, these are things that do not change. Objective truths about me, about other people, about the life that God has given me, those are things that do not change. And that completely changed everything, because then it was no longer dependent on how I felt and on how I perceived things to be. I could read the scriptures and trust that reality is what it is, regardless of how I feel.
Now, you spoke earlier about maybe some sexual confusion. You thought maybe you were bi at one point in time. Did you receive counseling to help you seek out your true identity when it comes to your sexuality?
Yes, I did. So after my husband and I got married, we actually, of course, which is really inevitable when there's sexual trauma and sexual addiction, we started having some problems. And so I went to counseling, and he went to counseling. And it was really, what was also amazing was that I was at the university at the time. I was taking a university course on sex addiction. And as I was taking this course, I went into it just thinking, wow, this is fascinating. This is really cool. And then because I enjoyed that, I thought it was interesting to talk about what makes sex addiction and what makes other sexuality normal or healthy, right? So we talked about that and we had those discussions. And then as time went on and as I was going through counseling, I realized, wait a minute, it makes sense that I am understanding this language because this is a problem that I have. And I didn't even realize it until then. And so there was a real moment for me, if you don't mind my sharing. I share it not to be graphic, but I share it because I want people to understand how horrible this moment can be. But I know many people who have come to this moment, and that there's hope for you. There's healing. There can be that turnaround because there's a beautiful plan of sexuality that we can follow. And so what happened for me was that I was just using pornography like any other day, and what I was watching turned out to be one girl with several men. And as I was watching, I could see that she was trying to push one of them away and starting to say no. And as I was watching, I realized there is something wrong with me. There is something wrong. I need help. And that was really the moment that God just changed everything. I picked up the phone, I called a trusted friend, and I said, I need to tell you something. And that's what changed everything.
You know, Colette, you really hit the nail on the head there. I've spoken to other people who were addicted to drugs, alcohol, sex, and they say, you have to hit your rock bottom and realize that you need help. You can't have other people say to you, you have a problem, you know, pointing fingers at you. The walls go up, right? People become defensive, say, I don't have a problem, I'm fine, you know? So you have to reach that rock bottom before you finally realize that, yes, I finally need help. And it's amazing that you did that. Outside of the counseling and you reached out to your friend, and of course you're praying to our Heavenly Father, what else really helped you overcome the addiction?
What really helped me overcome the addiction was the support group that I was able to start. So there was a contact that I had in Lethbridge, a man who had already set up a Christian support group for men who were dealing with sex addiction and porn addiction. And so when I got into contact with him, I asked him, is there one for women? And he said, well, no, but you should start one. So I started one, and I sat alone in a room waiting for people to join me for a year. It didn't really take off. And then suddenly somebody contacted me and said, you know, you need to come and speak to this group of young women. And when we started talking, we were all like, oh, me too. You know, I can't believe you're saying the words that I have always felt. You know, we were sharing stories where we were just speaking each other's language, and it was just unreal. And so we started a support group where we were just praying for each other and helping each other to live out our sexuality the way that we believe we should, based on our worldview. And so that's what was really, you know, what I think has been so hard for me in being in Lethbridge in the last few months, is knowing that our city, along with so many other cities, have banned the kind of counseling that I went through. And because it was, you know, unfortunately, we think that the type of counseling that comes to, you know, where we talk about sexuality and issues of gender, we think that we have to make sure that we protect LGBTQ people, and we should. And that's why we need to be really careful that we define things, because I've had the therapy that has now been banned, but I have specifically asked for it because it helped me reduce my unwanted sexual attractions and unwanted sexual behavior. And because of that, it is now defined as being illegal. And that's something we need to speak up more. Women like me, people like me, we need to speak up and say, this is counseling that I went to. It was not torture. It was a good thing. And I need to be free to choose the counseling that I went to, because just because something illegal is done to me, does that mean that it should be illegal for me to seek help?
Colette, what advice do you have for those who may be going through confusing times like you experienced, especially when it comes to sex and gender?
I think what's really important for us to understand is that we've been getting one dimension of an idea about sexuality. And so I've been doing some research into some of the sex education that we get in our community of Lethbridge when it comes to these topics, some of the organizations that provide sex education. And this is where we learn about sexuality. Unfortunately, the sex education that we receive and that youth receive is unfortunately it's not holistic in the fact that it doesn't include spiritual aspects. And so what happens is that people like myself, our sexuality gets conflicted with other things, and we don't know where to go. And we need to know that there are other options. And so it's really important, especially that the Christian community, that the church community step up and say, there's a Christian worldview, Christian view of sexuality that offers you hope and healing. And it goes far beyond any kind of fleeting sexual identity.
You talked about some of the therapy that's available now for women. You know, it's been around for men for a very long time, especially the programs. How about today? Are there still great support programs for women today addicted to porn?
I would say, I think if a woman reached out to me now compared to 5 years ago, I think it's possible that there might be a few more resources, a few more books. But to be honest, Hal, it has not taken off as it should. You know, men are getting the help that they need, but there's no the support group for women in Lethbridge is no longer running because there was nobody else who was able to step up and take over. There's not many groups of them. Even across Canada, even in the United States, they're there, but you really have to look for them. And in our community, especially in our small community, people feel like there's no help. And that's why I'm so eager to tell people that there is help. And organizations like Faith Beyond Belief really can show you that there's more. There really is hope.
I was thinking maybe, you should take the lead and take the charge, and you're doing that already with Faith Beyond Belief. Colette Ikema, Associate Speaker with Faith Beyond Belief, thanks so much for your powerful story today and for joining me.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless. Thanks so much for watching.